I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and you have tuned into the amazing For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families, and the birds and the trees and the aeroplankton and the nematodes and pretty much everybody and everything, because we are all wrapped up together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And regular listeners will have noticed that I did not greet Toledo in my opening specifically, and that's because, unfortunately, even though the show did air live as usual on 100.7 FM in Toledo, the station informed me that they lost the recording. That there was no actual recording of what went out that day. So I've got to recreate the show based on my notes, but that shouldn't be any great difficulty because it was a really good show, and I've got really good memories of it. I made the show, broadcast it live originally from my hotel room in New York City because I drove to New York to watch the world premiere of the movie Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island. And it was a really excellent documentary made by Dr. Heidi Huttner. We've had her on a few times over the years as she was making that movie. So it was really great to see that finally come to fruition. Now, the drive down to New York City was a little bit depressing because I saw a lot more forests cut down, a lot more woods alongside the trees. And you know, I'm 60 now, and actually some of these trees I watched grow from saplings. I mean, these have been growing along the interstates for decades, and people have just let them grow, which was great. But now I guess there's money in the Inflation Reduction Act. Biden wants to cut down 50 million acres of forests, and they're starting, I guess, with the trees alongside the highways, which is really depressing. But the trees are going to get some revenge, though, because a lot of the hillsides that they've cut all the trees down now are really too steep, and they're right next to the road. And so in a couple years, once the roots have time to decay, you get a big, heavy rainstorm, which we're getting more and more of, and you're going to have mudslides. You're going to have interstate highways blocked by mudslides because they've cut down all the trees that were holding the soil in place. So not really something to look forward to. But other than that, the drive was pretty good, uneventful. Got in through the Holland Tunnel Saturday night, and Holland Tunnel's a lot grimier than I remember it. But I came out of the tunnel, and it's nighttime, but there's all these skyscrapers, and they're all lit up, and it's really exciting. There's people everywhere. The cars are, the inner city, New York City driving really gets your adrenaline flowing, and I got in too late to go to a restaurant, and I really didn't have the money because the hotel room was really expensive. So I actually went out and found a deli just around the corner, 24-hour deli. I got a sandwich and a potato salad for $10, which was great. And there's a couple guys in there that had these really dazzling sneakers. You could barely look at them. They were so bright and shiny. And I've seen TV shows about the sneaker culture in New York City, but that's the first time I saw that actually. And of course, there's people everywhere all the time, all sorts of people. Everybody's on their way to do something important by the looks of it, and it's just a really. I have to say, uh, I do really like New York City. Now, I originally recorded this show before I got to see the documentary. I saw the documentary. It was fantastic, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that on next week's show. But I also had to write my testimony in opposition to House Bill 434. I'm recording this revision of the show on Wednesday, December 7th, and yesterday, December 6th, I was actually in Columbus, and I spoke in front of the Senate Energy Subcommittee in opposition to HB 434. And, that was an experience also. I'll tell you more about that next week, too. But this week, we've got a great show lined up for you. I had a recorded interview with Stephany Seay, our good friend from Roam Free Nation, who's out there defending the last of the bison. And then after Stephany, we'll hear from our advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca, hopefully, will be able to give us an update, a repeat of her show on Bengal tigers. She did a nice little piece on tigers. And then after that, it's ecological news, and that was it. That was our show that I'm recreating for you here. Now, something that's really bothering me about the whole situation with House Bill 434, and I'll talk more about this next week. But like I said, they told us on Friday that we had to have all our testimony in written form and PDF format emailed to them before 10 a.m. on Monday, which is why I didn't get to really enjoy New York City. I did get out a little bit on Saturday or on Sunday before the movie. I made it out to an incredible used bookstore called The Strand, which is apparently like one of the premier used bookstores in the world, and bought some books. Which was nice. And I actually, because the film was shown as part of a film festival, I was able to watch. They had a block of shorts before Heidi Hutner's film came on, and those were really great. They were very upbeat for the most part, and really kind of inspiring. I loved those shorts too. But like I said, my enjoyment of New York was cut short because I had to spend a good deal of Saturday writing out my testimony, and I ended up emailing it in at about 11:30 Sunday night. And part of what happened yesterday is that there were a bunch of us that went to testify in opposition. Now, they had the proponents testify last week, and what happened is the proponents, they gave them as much time as they wanted. They got to speak. One guy apparently spoke for almost half an hour in support of this bill, which incidentally is probably going to benefit him personally because he was representing a company that will be in line for a lot of nice big fat contracts if this law passes. But anyway, when we got there were 9 of us, and they did a bunch of other bills ahead of the bill we were going to be talking about. And then the chair of the committee goes, "Oh well, it's already past 11. We have to have a hard stop. We can't keep listening to testimony past 11:30. So each of you gets try to keep it under 3 minutes." And it's just so blatant that they would toss that at us, that they gave the proponents as much time as they wanted to spout incredibly nonsensical, false things. Their testimony was just full of misinformation, and some of us were able to take out some of that misinformation with our testimony. But to then limit us to 3 minutes each was, just terrible. Now, in the end, they ended up continuing to listen to testimony for 1 hour, but still, nobody there got to give all the information that they were prepared to give to the senators, and it was really just very stressful to have a statement all prepared that you took the time to print it out and send it in, and then to be told, oh, you've only got 3 minutes, good luck. So we did the best we could, and I think we really helped the situation. I think some of the senators were really kind of woken up by our testimony. We're kind of like, what the heck? What is this thing, this authority, which would literally be the authority in Ohio regarding everything having to do with radiation or nuclear power or nuclear waste. No one, even the governor, not the legislator, if this goes through, no one can control this authority in any way. There's not even any mechanism for commenting on anything it does. It just gets to literally do whatever it wants to the state of Ohio. Anyway, like I said, more on that next week. This week's show, we got a great show lined up for you. I'm going to be interviewing Stephany Seay, our good friend at Roam Free Nation, who's trying to protect the last of the wild bison in North America that are based out of Yellowstone. And it's a cautiously optimistic interview, some potentially really good news for the bison in Yellowstone. You'll have to give a listen to that. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons, just fantastic people and organizations. Then Rebecca, I'm hoping to re-record her little piece on Bengal tigers, which is kind of interesting. So then after that, there's Ecological News, and that will be the show. And so thanks so much for listening to this podcast version. And we will be, I think, going right over to the interview with Stephany Seay now. All right, Stephany Seay, welcome to For a Green Future.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be back with you again.
Yeah, it's been a while, but we always like having you on.
Thank you.
And let's see, the reason I wanted to bring you on this time is because there was recently a meeting of the Interagency Bison Management Plan Group, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and so this is the plan. It's kind of an oxymoron to talk about managing wild animals, but
right.
But that's what this plan was about. And so was this what they call a stakeholders meeting?
It's not a stakeholders meeting. It's actually a business meeting for the tribes and agencies involved signed on to the plan. The public is kind of like an audience. They give us, in the middle of the day, they give us about 2 to 3 minutes to share public comments. And then it's funny because the really important discussions tend to happen after the public comment period. So, but you kind of, after all these years, you kind of know how it's going to go, and you're still repeating the same thing. We want more buffalo on a larger landscape. Stop this slaughter. Stop this hunt. So, but it's it's a little bit of a lip service to the public, but it's important to be there. It's important for them to hear what people have to say. And at this meeting, as usual, all the comments were strongly pro buffalo.
Well, that's good to hear. Are there any improvements or is there any progress in this plan? I mean, there had been some talk about increasing the number of bison they're going to allow to live. Do you see anything like that happening this time?
Well, this, and I want to give a shout out. We went as Roam Free Nation. It was the first time we did something like that as our brand new organization, and just wanted to throw that out there for people. But this year, I mean, I'm usually sweating and squirming in my seat, wanting to scream at these guys. But this year, there were some positive things said. And I have to hand it to the Yellowstone Superintendent Cam Shawley. He spoke strongly in favor of the buffalo. He stood up to the DOL, and it was really a refreshing turn of events. And I've never really liked many Yellowstone superintendents because of the actions that they take. And Yellowstone's still going to capture for slaughter, capture for quarantine. But at this meeting, so the current population is at 6,000, which is the highest that it has ever been since, Yellowstone became a park. And the DOL has been arguing, we need population reduction, because in the plan, they have a population cap set at 3,000 animals, which is extremely low. And it's not a population cap that is based on science or any common sense or anything logic at all. But now today the population is 6,000, and the DOL kept wanting to push for, we need to do population reduction. And Cam Shawley was like, you know what? We're meeting, the population's at 6,000 right now. We're meeting the plan's objectives. What's the problem? There's no problem. And he's like, conflicts have gone down as the population has grown. So, and he even challenged the Montana state vet who works for the Department of Livestock, who is not the friend of a buffalo. He challenged him. He said, give me one scientific reason that there needs to be a population reduction. And he couldn't do it. The state vet could not give a single scientific reason.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And then the park biologist, Chris Jeremiah, he's the park's bison biologist, he let it be known, and we knew the carrying capacity for Yellowstone was greater than the population's ever been, but he let it be known, and I will quote him directly, Yellowstone National Park, I wrote it down right here, Yellowstone National Park can sustain 10,000 buffalo, and that's just within park boundaries.
Oh, wow.
That doesn't include all the public land surrounding Yellowstone.
Well, that's an amazing thing to hear.
It is.
And yeah, 10,000 bison, and now you're starting to talk.
Right.
Yeah. You're just
and the DOL they were sweating and squirming in their seats.
Now, DOL,
kind of discussion.
Just to be clear, that's the Montana Department of Livestock, right?
Yes,
DOL.
I'm sorry, Montana Department of Livestock, and they're the ones who, unfortunately, under a Montana state law, they hold authority over wild bison when they enter the state of Montana. And I don't mean anything against fox or chickens, but that is like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Mm. They have no business having any authority over wild buffalo.
Right. Well, it sounds like, if they're proposing things that have no basis in science,
right.
Then yeah. Wow. Well, that is great news. That's great to hear. It does sound like there's a definite shift there.
I think there is. And, these agencies have been doing this for so long, and there's been so much support for the buffalo. There's been so much public pressure to stop this management plan, to take this trap down, stop the slaughter, stop the firing line hunts. And they're finally starting to respond to that pressure. And, we're also looking at Yellowstone is soon going to be coming out with an EIS with one of the alternatives to end capture for slaughter. And so we're really looking forward to that EIS coming out. And I'm not exactly sure when it'll be. It's going to be quite a few months yet, but we will be certain to let everyone know when that happens, because there will be opportunity for public comment.
EIS, Environmental Impact Statement.
Yes, I'm sorry. I use all these acronyms. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, as long as we clear it up. So
yeah.
Wow. Well, that's really good news to hear. Who else spoke at the meeting, and did anybody else say anything that surprised you?
Well, there was another really good thing during the public comment period, and I hope I don't get this wrong. But there was a gentleman who came representing, he was from the Southern Cheyenne, and he was representing Northern Arapaho, Southern Cheyenne, and the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people, the Sioux Nation. And he had a letter from the tribal leaders representing those tribes that challenged the DOL, the Department of Livestock, saying that they do not have authority or jurisdiction over federal open and unclaimed lands in the state of Montana, which is a really big deal. And it sounded from the letter, and we're trying to get a copy of it, and when we do, we'll share it. But from the letter that they are working on taking some legal action against the state of Montana.
Wow,
So that was pretty exciting.
that would be huge because there's lots, as you mentioned, lots of federal lands that border Yellowstone, right?
Oh yeah. Yep.
And right now the DOL is involved in preventing the bison from accessing those lands. So if this holds up, then we might could we see an end to the line of hunters that get on the road there and just.
I would love to believe that's true, but what we still have is we've got all these tribes hunting under treaty right, and they're saying strong positive words. We want more buffalo on a larger landscape. We want them to migrate out into here and to here and to here. Yet the hunters from these tribes are the very ones that are, by their individual actions, preventing that from happening. So it's like there's going to have to be some self-restraint. There's going to have to be some kind of a moratorium on the hunt. If you ever want to get buffalo out on the landscape, you're going to have to stop standing at the border and shooting every single one of them that walks out of the park down.
Yeah, that would seem to be fairly straightforward. Yeah.
I mean,
maybe they could do something where the hunters are only there a few days out of the week, for example. And
they do that.
Oh, they do that now. Okay.
They do that. So most of the hunting takes place, what is it? It's like Thursday through Sunday. And so the buffalo kind of get Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off. But it doesn't matter. As soon as the hunters show up, I mean, most of the time the buffalo are near the park boundary, and there's so much hunting pressure that they turn around and go deeper into the park. And then a few days go by and they're trying to work their way back, and bam, all the hunters are back again. And so it's just this crazy cycle. And then a lot of times when the buffalo run back into the park, the trap is in operation. And so they're essentially, with their rifles, hazing them towards Yellowstone Stevens Creek buffalo trap, where they get captured for slaughter and quarantine. And then the hunters get mad at Yellowstone for capturing during the hunt, but nobody wants to take responsibility for their own actions. It's really insane.
Yeah. Well, at least the numbers are still going up. That's something. But
yes.
Yeah, it does sound like there's still a lot more room for improvement. But
most definitely. But the mindset is shifting, which is a very positive thing. So we have to keep the pressure on. And yeah, we have to keep the pressure on.
Right.
And then there was another interesting thing, and I don't know, I mean, it's not like incredibly good news, but it's an interesting bit of news, is that every year it's Yellowstone who usually comes up with a suggested kill number, how many buffalo they want to kill that season. And they have said they are no longer going to do that. They said a lot of it was having to do with all the agencies just argue about that number all the time. And, most of the tribes say it's way too high. That's got to go down. And the DOL says it's not enough. And they just don't feel like they want to set that number because, what was it they said? Meeting the IBMP objectives does not require saying we need to remove X number of buffalo. So that was pretty interesting. It doesn't mean that they're not going to capture and kill. It doesn't mean that at all. But it is a shifting mindset. Things are changing.
Well, that's great. Not a moment too soon there. So
right.
Yeah. So you said you got to see some buffalo again. You got to get out there and take a look.
We did. We got to go there out on Horse Butte, where they're safe, in a safe spot on Horse Butte. and it was so great to see them. I guess there was close to about 100, and these are buffalo from the central herd, which is, you know, they're in the most danger of all the buffalo in Yellowstone. But it was interesting too, because this part of Horse Butte is across. There's a highway across the lake, the Grayling arm of Hebgen Lake. And of course, there's hunters over there just scoping them out. They're just waiting for them to step just over the private property line where they're safe so that they can be hunted. And it's like, this is why you don't have more buffalo on a larger landscape. This exact behavior. I mean, you cannot just come and gun down everyone that steps over these invisible lines and expect them to be there tomorrow. You know, it just makes no sense.
Right. And
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the people of Montana want buffalo back on the landscape.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. The vast majority do.
Yeah, that's great.
It's mainly the cattle industry, the livestock industry that is against it. And it's not even all of them who are against it, the majority. But I mean, the majority of Montanans want buffalo, wild migratory buffalo, back on the landscape.
All right.
And obviously the tribes do too.
Yeah. And that would be great. I definitely would come to Montana to see that. So, so this is your first year, coming up to the end of your first year where Roam Free Nation has existed, your nonprofit there. What?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're only a couple months old, really, but yeah, we're doing it. We need to raise money so we can get back into the field. You know, we're having to work these other jobs in the meantime, but we're just going to keep pressing forward and keep getting the word out and get back to West and to Gardner as much as we can, and be with those buffalo and let people know exactly what's going on out there.
All right. And so how would people, if they wanted to do that, how would they go about checking you guys out?
Just come visit our website, roamfreenation.org. We're also on Facebook, but our donation page is on our website. I am technologically challenged, so I have some things to figure out still.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, roamfreenation.org.
All right, Stephany. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk some more in the future. Okay, and that interview with Stephany. So nice to hear from her again. And I just wanted to make a quick note. I actually recorded that interview Saturday night around 11 o'clock from my hotel room in New York City. And it was just a little bit, you know, what do they call that? Cognitive dissonance, that I was sitting in one of the most quote unquote civilized places with like the densest population of humans in North America. And we were talking about essentially wilderness. We were talking about what it's like out there in Yellowstone, and where there's practically no people, and it was just a little weird to be, you know, in the heart of New York City talking about the wilderness. And that's the thing about a green future, is that we can have cities. We don't have to disband the cities. We just have to make sure that the cities are operating in a way that doesn't destroy the wilderness. You know, we want both. In a green future, we want these nice, clean, exciting cities, and we want beautiful, pristine wilderness. And we can have both if we work at it and do what's necessary. So something else that's necessary is our advertisers and patrons. And we are very happy, very grateful that they're with us, because we couldn't be bringing this show without them. For Green Futures, brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging, and teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. There's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, wcparks.org. And of course, they're on all the social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., etc., etc. Just search for WC Parks or Wood County Parks. And this coming Saturday, they're going to have their annual holiday festival at the Carter Historic Farms, where they're going to have sleigh rides and hot chocolate, and people are going to be singing Christmas carols, and it's just going to be lovely. It may not actually be a white Christmas this year because right now the weather predictions are just sort of a little bit cloudy and in the 40s or 50s, but that makes it a little more comfortable to go. So thanks so much to the Wood County Park District, and thanks so much also to the patrons of For a Green Future. The patrons are people who have gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. And there they searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page, and they were able to scroll through, pick a membership level that matched their budget, and then they went ahead and became patrons, and we're so grateful to them. So now, this is the section of the program where normally Rebecca would come in, and during the live show, she did a little thing on Bengal tigers. Unfortunately, Becca is right now, as we speak, in the process of getting a colonoscopy. And I don't think she would mind me mentioning this on air, because if you followed her on Facebook, Rebecca Wood, you would know that basically she's been posting every single detail of this process in big capital letters for everyone to see. So I'm not going to try to have her redo her Bengal tiger report, because she'll still be on the meds from having had the colonoscopy, and got to get this done and get this out there. So, but Rebecca will be back next week with some interesting stuff. And not that we have any lack of things to talk about, because there is a ton of ecological news. And let's see, we can go right to that. And so our first story, this doesn't sound like it's environmental, but it really is. It sounds political, but in reality, it has a huge impact on the environment, because what's going on here in Ohio is the Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, and there's a good write-up of this, our friends at Ohio Citizen Action, on their website. It's called "Frank LaRose and Ohio Republicans Have Launched an All-Out Assault on Voters and Democracy." And that sounds like an exaggeration, but it isn't. Because what they're doing, in Ohio, citizens can bring referendums. So if the legislature refuses to deal with the problem or does the wrong thing in regards to a problem, then you can circulate a petition, and you have to get millions of signatures. But if you get your millions of signatures, you can any citizen can put something on the ballot to be voted on by everybody in Ohio. It's very democratic. Unfortunately, Frank LaRose wants to raise the percentage for passing that, because right now it's just simple majority. If you get 50% plus one vote, the measure will pass. He wants to raise that to 60%, and that makes it pretty much practically impossible to pass anything, because in America, there's 35 to 40% of people who literally believe anything. I mean, we got UFOs, we got Bigfoot, we got certain political figures, we got lizard men. There's people, the percentage is that high that believe in lizard men running. They're behind the whole everything. The Illuminati. Probably we got 40% of people believing the Illuminati are running everything in the world. And the one reason we know that this doesn't have anything to do with democracy is that in this proposal by Frank LaRose, amendments to the Constitution that are put onto the ballot by the legislator they still only have to get 50%. So if the lawmakers in Columbus, the very ones that the referendum process was designed to get around, if they're being jerks, um, they get to keep the 50% majority thing for changes they want to do to the Constitution. But the rest of us would have to get 60%. And this really is a solution without a problem, because over the past 20 years, there have only been 16 of these referendums, so it's not like we're flooded with them. And 11 of those 16 have failed, even though they only had to get 50%. So it is also very interesting to note that 2 of the 5 that passed were anti-gerrymandering referendums. They were attempts to make it illegal for the parties like the Republican Party to gerrymander. And in fact, what has happened is that I believe that this is the reason that they're trying to do this, because they used illegally unconstitutional gerrymandered maps in the last election, and there's still supposedly this requirement that they go back to ungerrymandered maps for the next election. But if they could jigger with the Constitution and basically enshrine gerrymandering into the Constitution, then then they'll have power forever. Yeah, it's kind of one of those mad power schemes. So the reason this is so important in terms of the environment is that things like the House Bill 6 referendum, which was designed to protect us against coal and nuclear power and all their pollution, would never even get attempted, because there's no point in spending all the time and money and effort to get these signatures if you then have to get 60% of the vote too. So it's just really just a very direct attack on democracy and the Constitution of the state of Ohio. It's a direct attack on the Constitution of Ohio. So these people like Frank LaRose, who claim they're all about defending the Constitution, well, no, you're trying to attack the Constitution. And all about democracy, no, you're literally directly attacking democracy. You got to always look at what politicians do and not what they say. And what Frank LaRose is trying to do is just wrong. All right, on to Japan, leaping from Ohio to Japan. And we just find there's a story that Japan's birth rate is dropping. In fact, in 2021, they had less than 1 million people born, and that led to a population decline of about 300,000 out of the total population of around 125 million. Now, there was also a story in the American Heart Association journal that after the Fukushima disaster, there was a spike in infant heart surgeries. And one of the things we know that got pumped out into the environment by Fukushima was radioactive cesium. And radioactive cesium affects the muscles, and particularly the heart. And if some of the cesium gets into the heart muscles, it'll literally put a hole in the heart of a person who has absorbed that radioactive cesium. And so there was a spike of children needing open heart surgery in Japan, 14%, and it lasted for 4 years immediately after Fukushima. And so we know that pretty much everybody in Japan was exposed to higher levels of radiation. And we know that the background levels of radiation are higher in Japan now than they were before the Fukushima disaster, despite the fact that the government is lying and say that it isn't. When we've sent people over there with Geiger counters like Greenpeace and like people from Beyond Nuclear, they came back and reported, no, the ditches are full of radioactivity, the streams are full of radioactivity, the playgrounds have radioactivity in them. So the reason I'm bringing that up in conjunction with this story about birth rates dropping is that we also know from Chernobyl, and we had a research scientist on talking about this on our show in past years, when you put organisms into a radioactive environment, at first they can seem okay, but after 4 generations or so, what happens is there's cumulative DNA damage, cumulative genetic damage. And after about 4 generations, that population will die out. Their birth rate will drop steadily, and eventually they'll die out. And what's happening in Chernobyl is that, well, then new colonists move in, new birds and animals move in and sort of replace the generations that just faded away. And so it looks like it's a very healthy ecosystem, but if you actually look at them genetically, you find that after 4 generations, each of these waves of population just die out. And we are not 4 generations into the post-Fukushima environment in Japan, but we're about 1 generation in. And here we see a dropping birth rate. Now, there's all kinds of theories on why it's dropping. Some people say it's economic, some people say it's social, some people say just women just don't want to have babies anymore. And they only had 800,000 births in the first 3 quarters of this year, so they're on track to have even less than they had last year. But I think we need to consider the idea that the Japanese have raised their background levels of radiation, and this can't help but affect their fertility rate, the rate of successful pregnancies. So just a little something to watch in Japan to see if they keep fading away. Next, you might have heard about Prince William being in town, in Boston specifically, last week. And he was here to award something called the Earthshot Prize. And so I thought I'd go over what the Earthshot Prize is. Basically, they give £1,000,000, that's about $1.2 million, to different people who are doing different things to try to help the environment. And these awards. There were 5 awards in 5 different areas, and I have to say they're not all that great. I would have to say there's sort of a mix of good, bad, and ugly here in these Earthshot awards. One of the awards went to a fellow named Ketyi, who's over in India, and he has created something he calls a greenhouse in a box. And what it is this big sort of a movable tent. It's like a collapsible framework that you can drape aluminum coated cloth onto, and then you raise your vegetables, you raise your plants inside this big tent you've made. And it costs about 1/10 the cost of a traditional greenhouse, but the big advantage is that it's much cooler inside there. This past year, Indian farmers had a terrible time with incredibly high temperatures and drought, and that completely just baked their fields and wiped out whole crops. And then they had torrential rains, and so the baked crops got washed away. The people that were using these greenhouses in a box, they were able to raise like 7 times the amount of vegetables at a much lower cost and using much less water because they use drip irrigation. And so it's good, but it's also kind of like admitting the fact that because of the greenhouse effect, our planet is becoming uninhabitable. And that is, it's becoming too hostile to even just grow crops on. But people do have to eat, and this is better than starving people. So there was one of the awards. Another is, and this is another kind of it's cleaner cook stoves. A woman in Africa named Mukuru has developed a cook stove that uses pellets, and those pellets are made out of charcoal, wood, and sugar cane, and they burn cleaner and they burn much more efficiently. So you use a lot less wood, and because they've switched to buying pellets instead of going out and just chopping down trees and things in their neighborhood, it's meant a lot more free time, a lot more ease for the women in the culture who are traditionally the ones that have to make the fire and cook the food. And so it's cleaner, it's safer. There's a lot less disease in terms of respiratory disease, because the traditional stove that they use over there was making lots of smoke, and so this is better in every way. But it's still burning biomass in order to cook with, and there's better ways to do it, like you could use solar ovens, for example. But it's one of those improvements. Next one, the next award went to the Indigenous Women of the Great Barrier Reef, and that is a program where they're teaching Indigenous Australians to women specifically to patrol the reef and try to protect it from overfishing and other things that damage it. So that's a good one. Uh, okay, now this one is very interesting. The fourth award went to a company in Britain, in the UK, called Notpla, Notpla, and they have come up with a plastic replacement that uses seaweed, and it does everything you expect plastic to do. It's waterproof, and you can store stuff in it. You can make bottles out of it and cups and packaging, but it's completely biodegradable, and it's actually even edible. So this is a good one because we really have to get rid of plastics. There's no question about that. People have not been moving in that direction. We, of course, in Wood County, we tried to get plastic bags banned, and that didn't even get pushed through. And then they didn't even, with COVID came along, and like they got places, everybody just sort of started using plastic bags again. But the damage of plastic bags and plastics in general has not gone away. So this is a very good, looks like a very good product, and they're scaling up, and they're hoping to make more and more of it. Last one is this one. I would say is a definite no. This one it's a carbon capture and storage scheme, and there's a fella who's developed a system where you take carbon dioxide out of the air, you put it into water, you essentially turn it into like seltzer water, so it's all fizzy, and then you pump that water down into periodotite formations in the ground. And what happens in the periodotite is that the carbon dioxide basically leaches into the rock and kind of makes this big powder there. The reason I say no is it's a carbon capture storage scheme. That takes energy to pull carbon out of the air and then to pump it down into the rocks. And usually that energy's like coming from carbon based, so you're spending energy to pull carbon out of the air. And also it reeks of unintended consequences, because what's going to happen after decades of pumping high pressure CO2 into all this stone? Is it going to crumble? Is it going to change the pH? Are there going to be reactions with the groundwater? All of this stuff, it's a huge experiment. And the final problem is that getting it up to scale. That's one of the problems with all these carbon capture schemes. Getting it up to scale is practically impossible. The fellow who's doing this project, he anticipates being able to pull 1 billion tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere by 2040. And just to put that into perspective, the Prairie State coal plant in Illinois puts 1 billion tons of CO2 into the air every 2 weeks. So taking 20 years to pull 1 billion tons out, that you're pumping it in at the rate of 20, that same amount every 2 weeks, that's not a practical solution. So I disagree with the Earthshot prize on that one, but I thought it would be worth going into some detail about what the Earthshot prize actually is and what it does. All right, next, Macron, French Prime Minister Macron, came over and had a little chat with Joe Biden, and they both just kissed and renewed their commitment to nuclear power. And they recommitted in the statement from the White House, the joint Macron-Biden statement. They recommitted to promoting Bill Gates globally. Well, they don't say Bill Gates, but they basically talk about his technology, his nuclear technology, which doesn't exist yet, but billions are already getting dumped into it down that drain. And this is a case, promoting nuclear power globally is a case of what they call colonialism or imperialism. This is what colonial powers do: is you take the nasty, expensive, difficult, dirty technologies and you dump them on the third world countries that can't afford to maintain them, and you call that you call that economic progress. You take their money and you give them in return for their money the crappy technology. So one interesting thing is that this joint statement, even though it goes into a lot of glowing detail about nuclear, they never actually say the words wind or solar. They talk about green energy and alternative energy, but they never mention encouraging wind or solar energy. So I guess they just mean radioactive energy for green. I don't know. One, it's just interesting also because what we've reported before that the French nukes are failing. Over half their plants are shut down. The whole country's looking at spending a winter in the dark and cold without power because they don't have enough energy. They're importing it. They're importing wind and solar energy from Germany is what they're doing right now. But there may not be enough of it if it gets really cold, like in January. And it just reminded me, this Biden-Macron meeting reminded me of when the Prime Minister of Japan, after Fukushima, Obama went over there to Japan to basically shore them up and say, "You're going to keep nukes, right? You're not going to give up on nukes, are you?" And so, Japan, France right now is having nuclear failure, and here comes Biden saying, "You're going to stick with nukes, right? No matter what you promised." Yeah. So I don't know. It's kind of crazy. So we'll counter that with some really good news. This next news story is a Lake Erie news story. And it turns out the Ohio must put Lake Erie on a pollution diet under settlement terms. And this was published on the website MLive, which stands for MichiganLive.com, back on November 25th. And in fact, they're taking public comments on this until December 12th. But the federal EPA has told Ohio that they have to establish a maximum daily load for the runoff, the agricultural runoff that's going into the Maumee River and causing the algae blooms each year. So the federal EPA has finally said to the Ohio EPA, you have to have a mandatory cap, because this whole H2O Ohio thing that the governor came up with, where everything's voluntary, we've given him 10 years. We gave him a decade, and it has not worked. Okay, it has not reduced the pollution to the point where it makes any kind of difference. I think there was like a 5% drop or something like that. Not enough to stop the algae blooms, and so the Ohio EPA stepped in, or the federal EPA stepped in. The Ohio EPA now has until June 30th to come up with this plan, this total maximum daily load. And if they don't, or if the federal EPA doesn't accept the numbers, then the federal EPA will simply dictate to Ohio what your daily limit is. And so this is the result of a lawsuit brought by the Environmental Law and Policy Center, which basically said, hey, federal EPA, we've got a lake which is dying, and you are not doing your job protecting it because of all these algae blooms. And so they were forced into this. It wasn't a case of enthusiasm, but they're doing it. And so it's entirely possible that in a few years we may have a Lake Erie that's safe to swim in again. That would be wonderful. Okay, next story. And this one, I kind of, it's not, super current, but what I wanted to bring it up because what I'm doing here is, in researching my testimony for the hearing yesterday, I went back through and I found all kinds of articles talking about cancers and health problems of people who live downwind from radioactive sources. And I found one, for example, there's a 2003 report from PubMed that said cancers downwind from Hanford, which is a nuclear site, are much higher. I found a report from talking about from the CDC in 2013 talking about Fernald, Ohio. And in Fernald, they had workers that had to work with materials from the Department of Defense, uranium and other materials. It turns out they had a 50% higher rate of leukemia and other kinds of blood cancers. And then there's this 52% higher that's northwest of Cincinnati. Fernald is just northwest of Cincinnati. And that place operated from 1951 to 1985. Now, one thing that in that report they mentioned, they said that residents in the neighboring area are also claiming higher cancer rates and higher leukemia rates, but they didn't study them. They just studied the workers in the plant, but they didn't rule out that they could actually be higher. And this is what we find over and over and over again, is that the people who are around these nuclear installations, these waste processing places, these fuel processing places, they get higher rates of cancer, but the government will not do credible studies examining those rates of cancer. And that was one of the points I made in my testimony yesterday. And I talked also about Piketon, Ohio, which they found radioactive they had radioactive nuclides of plutonium and uranium in the classrooms of an elementary school. And children get cancer much more easily than adults do. So when they're exposed to radiation, that is. And so, it's just, and of course, in the 3 Mile Island movie that I did watch, they finally overlaid cancer rate maps they overlaid that over the plume of radiation that came out of 3 Mile Island, and the two match up perfectly. That is, if you lived in the plume, you have some of the highest cancer rates in the United States of America. And if you are outside of the plume, then your cancer rates are pretty much normal. And so over and over and over again, we see this pattern of nuclear wastes and nuclear processing causing deaths in the surrounding communities. And so that just makes this whole bill that much crazier. And that's about it for this show. Wow. So it was very nice re-recording this program. I do want to say that if you have any comments on our show, any suggestions, there's several ways you can get a hold of us. One is to email us at Joe, at joedemare4agreenfuture.org. That's JoeDemare a green future, AGREENFUTURE.org. You can also text anytime at 419-973-5841. And I just wanted to say, there's a lot of fronts, and this battle to literally save the planet is going on a whole bunch of different areas, and sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. But one thing we know for certain is that if we don't do anything, like if we didn't speak up for this House Bill 434, it would have already passed, because this is like the third time it's been introduced. And each time there's been opposition that has put it, back on the back shelf. But just like environmentalists can't give up, the people who are trying to destroy the environment with these outdated technologies, they never give up either. In fact, just yesterday there was a story that the current Prime Minister of Japan wants to restart all the Japanese nuclear plants, even the ones that are literally right on top of fault lines. And that's just a symptom of how crazy the people that want to essentially destroy the environment are. But they're also relentless. And so we also have to be relentless. And we just have to do it if we want to have a green future. And I'd like to have a green future with you folks. This is Joe DeMare signing off. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I I like birds and things. A creep